Talk about some of my research, but I think partition pricing, this area is something that we've all talked about in the last few years. So I hope the presentation can be somewhat interactive, and you can share with me some of your experience in setting prices and how consumers have reacted. This is research that I've been conducting over the last several years with one of my faculty colleagues, who's also in our marketing department. And we've recently started collaborating with one of our PhD students, Ajay Abraham, who's co-authored on a couple of papers as well. And what I mean by partition pricing, or this idea of nickel and diming your customers, has been talked about a lot recently in the popular press. Flew on Southwest and got this napkin with my drink, and it sort of expresses consumers' frustration, or with these bag fees that we've been seeing at administered by many of the airlines. So Southwest is countering the move by several of their competitors to start charging for bags. And they're saying, if we're not charging for bags, that's our differentiator. That's why you should fly on our airline, because we don't charge for bags. And it's been very interesting that companies have decided that they will institute a nominal fee for bags. Right? It was considered by customers to be one of their rights. Everybody checks bags. It's something that really surprised consumers when these airlines started charging. And yet, would there have been such a reaction if the airlines had simply started charging $25 more per ticket? Likely not. This really hit consumers because the fee was allocated to a particular component of the price, right? So they're saying we're going to charge, $180 for our ticket and $20 for each bag you check, rather than increasing that price to $200. Right? And so that's exactly what I'll be talking about today. Is how if you're the airline and based on your cost structure, based on the competitive marketplace, you decide the right price for your airline ticket is $200 to go from here to Atlanta. Then, how should you divide that up? Should you divide that up into a bag fee and the overall price of the ticket? We know that from our flying experiences, there are many taxes and fees that are tacked on here or there. How should you present that price to the consumer? Right. So I won't be talking as much about how to set that overall price at $200, because that's something that's been studied a lot already in the literature, and that's something that you want to look at your competitors, look at your cost structure to determine, look at what consumers are willing to pay primarily. What I'll be talking more about is the division of that total price into its various components. And what we'll see is that consumers really care how that price is divided among the components. Right? They have a visceral reaction when you start charging for things like bags. Right? So there's been a lot of commentary about this in our popular press. And some of these articles are recent. One in the Wall Street Journal last year talked about airlines loading on all these fees. And for some airlines, they can be a pretty significant part of the total price. For example, in this article, they talked about Spirit Airlines, which apparently gets about 37% of its revenue from these extra fees. Right? So it's not insignificant. It's not just onesies, twosies. It's a significant part of their revenue. There was a nice article in the Washington Post about concert tickets. Right? So you buy a concert ticket for $39. It seems pretty reasonable until they tack on a processing fee of $1.50, and they tack on another handling fee of $10, and pretty soon you're talking more like $50 instead of more like $40. And so, that original price you're seeing to get you interested in going to the concert, wow, it's only $39. By the time you're checking out, Ticketmaster is taking $50 of your money. And consumers get upset about that. So this article compared, it's not just Ticketmaster, it's all the concert venues in the area who are typically charging these add-on fees. And so that was another article. But as I mentioned, these are not all recent articles. This has been going on for a long time. And this other article in the Washington Post, was in another recessionary period, 2002. And I think this is often coming to the forefront of our conversations when it is a time that companies are thinking about how to increase their fees and how to navigate an environment where consumers are very, very interested in saving money. So it's often where we see these conversations start. People aren't necessarily so worried about this when things are flush. And please feel free to jump in if you have
I have a question.
Please, Lisa.
I was just wondering, as you're going through this, would these companies be able to have these tack-ons currently if it wasn't for internet purchases? Because it was maybe too expensive to have a person on the phone and you get all the way done and you have the end result. You go, heck no, I'm not paying for that.
Right. These fees are responsible for a lot of being in shopping carts. Yes.
Okay.
And one of the things we talk about, so I think you all received an article we published in this little management review, and one of the things we talk about is the process of setting your price and dividing it into these components, and we talk about it as a decision tree. Right? So you want to think about what your competitors are doing, and I think because a lot of us are competing with internet retailers now, there is a norm that you charge for certain things. So if you think about Barnes & Noble, our bookseller, you don't expect to pay any kind of shipping fee, and yet they have to pay trucks to deliver the books to their stores, right? And yet when we purchase the same book online at barnesandnoble.com, you've got to pay shipping, right? And it's a big deal. So we're thinking about channel issues where you're buying online or you're buying in a brick-and-mortar store, and one channel it's common to pay shipping, another channel is not. And I think a big part of this is the competitive structure where we see what we see competitors doing. And we think there's an opportunity for companies that identify charges people hate to pay, and then saying we're going to bundle those in and offer them to you for free, right? Meanwhile, increasing the price of their other components, because people just have this negative reaction to paying for some fees, right? But one of the downsides of bundling all the fees together is that your total price becomes higher. So if people are searching online and they're seeing that your price is higher than another price, it can hurt you, right? So you have to think about this as game theory and think about the way consumers are approaching you. Are they comparing prices across your competitors? Are they bundling or not? What are norms within your industry? But yes, I think that's a big consideration, is that there are different channels who are in these markets.
I would really like to know, and if you're privy to any of this, I always wanted to know what are the deliberations that go on in the boardroom or whoever's in the decision, making the decision to actually price it that way. I mean, we saw what happened in Bank of America when they tried to charge $5 on a debit fee, and they actually retracted it because of public outcry. Now, I'm a lawyer. I look at my bills. We were talking about this outside. I was talking to Matt about it outside. Matt says to me, and I agree with him entirely, my clients would rather see me have $10 more on my bill than put $1.76 in postage on my invoice.
Absolutely.
And I think the same thing should be true for those arrogant corporate boards who think that they can just start charging away at fees when really the right strategy is entirely different. But have you heard of any examples of how these decisions are made or the rationale behind them?
Well, I think that's a really interesting case because they clearly didn't do enough market research. But
they're huge
also
companies. I mean, airlines.
Right.
I think it's arrogance. I think it's General Motors thinking. What did General Motors think when the first Volkswagen was imported here? That'll never amount to anything. Meanwhile, you go in your parking lot and you will see 70% of the cars not manufactured in the United States.
And with the Make America case too, there are two different customer segments, right? So at least, right, there are the customers who don't pay these fees because they have a huge minimum balance, and there are the people who do get nickel and dimed along the way, and it may be that they are pricing for one group more effectively than for another group.
And doesn't, when you talk about when a company investigates what's the norm out there, in our collective memory, there must have been one airline that first did this.
Yes.
And how many jumped on the boat following that that eventually gave Southwest the ability to say, hey, we're going to differentiate yourself this way.
Right.
Because one of the points is that Bank of America, they were the only ones that crossed that line. Nobody else did. Everyone held their breath, and then they back off. Because there's another, I personally have a banking issue. I switched banks, and I've used Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, all these other banks, and I use Quicken for my personal finances, and you get to, you know, get your financial information feed at no charge, and it's all done securely. I go to this new bank, and I go, okay, I'm going to set up my Quicken account here, and they go, there's a $10 a month fee. And I go, oh, what? Wells Fargo doesn't charge for it, Merrill Lynch doesn't charge for it, Morgan Stanley doesn't charge for it, and you're charging $10 a month for this? You know,
Right. That's a key part of this, right? So you have to know what's going to make your customers hop to the competitor, right? So if this is a big deal to people, you know, banks are tough because often it's
from
very
a dollar
sticky,
amount,
right?
it's nothing, but it's still the
It's
the principle.
emotional. Yeah, it's the principle, it's the emotional reaction.
I was going to say, you mentioned who was the first airline. I think one of the first airlines that started doing this was an Irish company out of Dublin called Ryanair. Ryanair are so notorious for nickel and diming, but what they did is they always had a low price strategy from the get-go. They took prices down so low and made it so competitive in their world to fight against it. They took prices down to the point where you could fly to Paris or whatever for $50. You know, from Dublin or from London or whatever. But they took the pricing structure down very, very low. And they've always been the low-cost airline, and they beat everybody on cost. But once they got to that low level, then they started nickel and diming like crazy. And they're upfront about it. They're like, yeah, we'll nickel and dime you to death if you don't fly the way we want you to fly so that we can save money to continue to give you low prices. So if you keep coming on board with your 15 different bags or whatever, come ahead and do that. But we will nickel and dime you to death on those 15 bags. And, you know, we'll charge you for that bottle of water we give you. And it's at the point now where the joke is, apparently the guy, the CEO of the company, joked about this publicly, and it became world headlines, is that he was going to charge people to go to the toilet on the plane. And they went wild. I mean, they were like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And he said, you know what, if I could actually put handrails on a plane like we do with the bus, I would do that to pack more people on board, to get you the low prices you want. It's just like, you know, they're all following suit now. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't agree with the nickel and diming myself, but they still probably, if you want to buy that basic ticket and just hop on that plane like you would a bus and not take anything with you except a little plastic bag with your bottle of water in, you can probably get, you know, you can get to London or Paris or some part of Europe for a very, very low price.
And that's the case where customers are looking at that price. You know, maybe
Oh, yeah.
they're buying online, they're looking at that low price and saying, oh, I can afford this, I can do this, right? And so you're jumping on board because you see that low price, and then, you know, it may be that these add-ons, you know, add up to a fare that you would have paid on another airline by the time you're done. But, you know, that low price, that initial price is what gets consumers to commit and then potentially spend more. So that's a strategy. And again, this relates to that decision process that consumers go through when they decide among all the competitors, who are they going to go with? And you know, how are you going to get those incremental customers?
So, you know, the title of your thesis here is how to know when to nickel and dime. So when you look at like a Bank of America, right, their problem was legislation changed, they weren't making the same money on their debit card fees, so they had to find another way to make the money off their consumer. And Bank of America put their toe in the water to be the first one to charge the $5 or whatever it was going to be a month, and they thought, Randy said, they were arrogant enough to think that all the other big banks would just follow suit, and that would be the norm. Right? That's the way it was back in the 90s before things started consolidating and everybody got free checking. So as a business owner or a board, you know, someone that's in a boardroom, how do you know when it's okay to do that nickel and dime? Right?
Some components make customers react more than others, right? So what I'll show here is that you know, it depends on the nature of the component. It's not the size of the component. It's not other characteristics. It's how people feel about paying extra for that particular thing, right? So, you know, one of our papers is called when 2 + 2 is not equal to 3 + 1, right? And dividing it up in different ways really matters. And so, in the case of other financial services, you know, sometimes you look at credit card companies and you say, how can they get away with charging people late fees? How can they get away with charging people so much interest? Well, when customers make the decision to take on that credit card, they never think they're going to be late with their bill, right? That's not part of the equation, right? They don't think they're going to rack up these interest fees, right? They're optimistic. And so they get themselves into a situation they don't like but it's freely chosen because they don't think those are going to apply to them, right? So, you know, we have to look at the place in the consumer decision process where this happens, and I will argue there are certain things like shipping, like labor, like these bag fees that people hate to pay for, but we found there are other things that they don't mind paying for, right? Also, if you're doing deals, if you're doing bundles, right, it matters which is the component that consumers feel is the central focal component, right? So we'll talk about some of our research where you're bundling pizza and wings. If people are really hungry for pizza, charge them full price for the pizza, give them a discount on wings, right? If they're really hungry for wings, charge them full price for the wings, give them a discount on pizza, right? So, you know, you can also vary these feelings based on your marketing message, right? Aren't you hungry for pizza? Try our deal where you get, you know, a discount on wings, right? Or aren't you, you know, craving those great buffalo wings, right? And then you give them a discount on pizza. So I think you can manipulate it to some degree. You can make some components feel worth paying more for. You know, if you're trying to get people to pay more for labor, right? You say this labor is the best. This craftsmanship is really great, and then people are less price sensitive to that component. So you know, there are some reactions among consumers we can take advantage of in terms of making the pricing decisions more palatable to them. Okay, so that's what I'll talk about. And the academic area that this all relates to is something called partition pricing. And this was introduced about 14 years ago by some authors at NYU in Columbia. And this initial paper was called Divide and Conquer, right? So you're dividing up your prices into different components, and in many cases, consumers like these divided prices better. So if you are saying my total price is going to be $20 for a book that I'm going to deliver to you online, it's going to be $15 for the book and $5 for shipping. Sometimes consumers are looking at that $15 price of the book and putting it in their shopping cart, and then maybe that $5 gets added on at the end. You know, that is a case where the partition pricing might be beneficial because they're focusing on that initial price, and then the extra is added on at the end. But in general, they're looking at cases where the components are mandatory, right? So if you're buying a book online, it's not like you can go pick it up. You've got to pay that shipping price to get it. And if you're buying auto services, you buy the part, but you're also buying the labor. They usually divide that out on the bill that they give to you, so you know how much you're paying for each. But you know, really, you know, it's revenue coming into the shop, and they can decide where to draw that line.
Are we talking about raising prices, or we're talking about keeping prices but just tiering it out?
Yes.
Because those would presumably be two different, or both.
What I'm talking about is after you've set your total price, right, that you think is going to be profit maximizing in your market, how do you divide it out so that consumers feel the best about paying for it? Yeah, yeah. So this is about consumer reactions to the price components rather than to the
Not
total
necessarily
price.
adding it up, and not necessarily
No, not necessarily
prices.
increasing it or decreasing it, but keeping it constant, making consumers feel differently about
Because
it.
on those first two examples, like you said, you're buying something that's far away. Shipping is part of it.
Yeah.
Same with auto price and labor, unless you think you can buy the part and do it yourself, but you're paying someone else to do it for you. But if you really look down at it, the travel and the baggage are two separate. Baggage is elective, but it's perceived by, that's part of what I'm getting. Most people don't go to Chicago and wait to get there to buy a winter coat. They bring the winter coat to Chicago.
Yes, yes.
So I expect to be able to bring my bag, and if I'm going to Hawaii, bring my golf bags. It's
Right,
not extra.
Right. Yes. So you know, this checked bag fee, you know, part of what we're seeing is consumers reacting to it and saying, okay, well, I'm not going to pay for that component. I'm going to stuff everything in my carry-on and, you know, clog up the aisle while I'm putting everything in there, right? But you know, what the original academic research looks at is components that are mandatory. I think you can also generalize this to cases that we refer to as bundling, where you're selling two things, and you know, one may be elective, like the bag fees. But if we think about some trips, like you know, you're going to Hawaii and you got to bring your golf bags, or you're going on an international trip and got to bring some clothes to wear, you know, that seems less elective, right? But their research is on this division among the components, and what research after that point has shown is that this decision about partitioning affects consumers' price perceptions. How much is the total price? People recall lower prices often when the price is partitioned into multiple components because they forget to add in the taxes. They forget to add in the shipping charge. And that's why one of the reasons that this partition pricing is so powerful, because you are dividing it up and people truncate or they don't add in all the different components, and it's hard to add in things sometimes when it's $14.99 and $3.99 and you're thinking, oh, 14 plus 3 is 17, right? Really, a couple more dollars on there. Yes.
But isn't it really technology at the end of the day providing a cost basis at this point so that you can maximize your profit on every transaction? You know, so Mary comes and I make $10 off of her because she wants ABC, and now Joey comes over here and I'm getting $20 off of him. But every single transaction that you're going through with that customer, you're absolutely maximizing the most money you can get from that. I mean, it's grabbing every penny you can from each transaction on a very customized level, and the technology is allowing you to do that now.
That's a lot in the economics literature. There's a literature on bundling, right? And the idea of bundling is that you can grab more of the customer surplus, right? And you can,
not leaving anything on the table.
customize.
You're taking it all off every single transaction.
But this is also about presenting a price to customers that is going to be shown more widely, and how will consumers react when there is a bag fee? How will consumers react when there is a debit fee, for their transactions? And so, it's can be looked at as a goal of profit maximizing for the firm, but we also have to think about the consumer's reaction to this.
I noticed that, and you mentioned something about being able to manipulate the partitioning effect, and I notice online there's a very interesting manipulation going on. Many times you will not be able to find out what the shipping value is until you get to the end of the transaction, and you've already taken 7 minutes to get there. Okay, and are you going to quit at that point in time? I think that's, while I don't like it, I think somebody thought long and hard about how to get to that point. They wanted the first price to be what you were thinking about all the time. It's going to cost $7.95 to get it to your house, but
yeah. I mean that's a big part of it. That we're focusing on that initial price. That's what comes through in the search results. I mean, now search results often show both the price of the product and the shipping price, and so you can add those together. But sometimes that's not available, and they've got their tricks. I'm sorry.
About that shipping things, and I think this happens with, I think it's Amazon. Once you've gone through the order process and they've determined a shipping cost, they give you a default shipping, like here's our 2-day shipping, and there's a cheaper alternative and a more expensive alternative, but as you're blowing through this thing, you may not realize I could do this cheaper.
That is an entire other discussion, and that's so interesting. Yeah, so that idea of defaults, right? We also make inferences about their motivations, right? They're trying to get us to pay more for this 2-day shipping rather than going with the free shipping, right?
But they thought a lot more about it than Bank of America did when they put the $5.
Amazon, they're just genius when it comes to shipping, right? So, they pioneered this free shipping, right? And so everybody tries to make that $25 minimum so they get free shipping. They have Amazon Prime where, then you're a member and you order everything in your life from Amazon. And, so I think they've done this very, very well. Those defaults are also very interesting when they imagine, what's going to be easy for you to say, oh yeah, well, 2 days would be convenient. It'll get to me on Wednesday anyway.
This may be a whole other discussion, so feel free to table this for another Thought Leadership Smith. But the introduction of smartphones and apps, mobile apps, where you can plug in you can scan a SKU, and then have that, basically the consumer has so much power, they can say, okay, I'm not going to buy this here, even though I'm in this store, because I can save $5 or however much they can save. And then also the Groupon and the living social deals, how basically, your opinion on how retailers and other consumable good, products and service companies are using that to maybe leverage public perception to purchase their goods or services. Just curious about your thoughts about that.
Right. So looking at the first one, it's interesting. Target has recently come out and said, we don't want our customers to be able to search and buy online after they try out the product in our store, right? And you know, you can see why. They're bundling in a bunch of things in that total price when you buy things at the store, like the services of their personnel who come and help you, the rent for their stores where they allow you to look at the product and touch it, and the wear and tear on their display models, right? So there's a lot of things that they're bundling into their price that the companies who are selling online don't have to pay, right? This idea of Groupon is also very interesting. We were talking about that a little bit before the start of this event, and I think that's something that's more and more becoming part of the marketing strategy for companies. And there, you're you know, leveraging social networks in order to sell more of your product, and those discounts are you know, looked at as a way to decrease the price. So then do consumers start thinking about your price as being the discounted price as opposed to the full price? So there are certainly some effects there.
Another part of that is when I go online, I get a hotel room or something like that, and then a blank comes up and it says, put in your coupon number. And I don't have one. I'm
But then you
thinking
can
I'm
search
getting
online.
ripped off.
Yeah. But you can search online and put
Oh
one
my
in.
God, should I get off
Want
this?
my
Should I get off
coupon
and
code.
go look for a coupon? I mean,
Yeah. So, you know, all these are really interesting things. So, you know, why do we think this is an interesting academic area? Well, you know, all the economics courses you've taken at the Smith School and at the University of Maryland tell you, you know, how you divide up the price, right? People are just going to focus on the price itself. They don't care how it's divided up. Economics calls that descriptive invariance. It doesn't matter how you present this, how you describe it. It just matters what the total price is, and that's what influences demand. But we know from experimental research, from in-field research, that consumers really do care. They have these strong and systematic preferences for certain partitions. So if you were to look at seller A versus seller B, you know, a lot of customers would prefer to buy their book from seller B, right? There's not as much going to that hated shipping charge for seller B as there is for seller A, and yet the total price is the same, right? And you know, of course, it depends at what point you're looking at prices, right? Are you seeing the shipping charge up front or not? But those order effects are things that we really need to think about carefully.
Is the implication here in this thing that shipping fees aren't what they're telling you that it is? Meaning shipping is not really shipping, which is, now,
Yeah.
I may be stating the obvious here, you know, but my point is calling something shipping implies that there's something, that's a line item on the P&L, right?
Yes.
So we have that, but when you call it something a checked bag fee, it's sort of like sort of miscellaneous that apply to a bunch of our bundled, there's a big bucket of costs we just want to charge you for, whereby, but this might imply that Amazon's telling you that it's $7 in shipping, but is that really the shipping?
Yeah.
Or is that just we can make it whatever we want it to be and just call it shipping?
Sure. So, you know, when we see these fees, often our thought, our intuition is that they're giving us cost plus shipping, right? So they're, you know, paying UPS or FedEx to get this to us, and then they're maybe adding a little profit on there. There's really a large dissociation between their fees and the prices they're actually paying to those shipping facilities. And you know, if you're really good at this, like Amazon, they're you know, that's a lot of what they do is figure out you know, who should get what when based on the fees that they pay. And so what we argue in our work is that there's a lot of latitude. So, you know, certainly you want to be truthful and transparent to your customers, but there's a lot of latitude. You can bundle in shipping to your total price. You can decide to bundle in these bag fees to your total price, or you can identify them separately, right? And even the Barnes & Nobles downtown, right? They, you know, they don't charge you for that shipping, and yet that's one of the line items on their P&Ls, right? Is all the shipping charges from the distributors, right? So, you know, it's really very fluid, and yet consumers often see these as being sort of cost plus, right? And it's not necessarily the case from the firm's point of view. So, what I'll talk about is some of our work that was published in 2008. This paper, when 2 + 2 is not the same as 1 + 3. We had a short article in the Harvard Business Review last 2 years ago, and this one that I passed out to you, when should you nickel and dime your customers? That's the one that has the decision tree where you think about various steps in the process. And then also talk about some new work that we're doing where we look at the downstream effects of partitioning prices. So what we've been talking about so far is, how do you get consumers to buy? But then we argue there are big implications for how satisfied consumers are when they use the product, right? So, maybe they signed on to get that credit card, and then they get this late fee, that wasn't a factor in their initial decision, but now it is. Or maybe they're being charged a separate fee for internet service at the hotel, and the internet service fails. Right? It's going to make it extra salient to them that this service was a failure if they've paid separately for that, or if they've paid extra for shipping and then their book is late coming to them. So we're arguing that there are these pretty serious downstream effects when consumers encounter service failure if they felt like those charges were partitioned out. So in our first set of studies, this is experimental work that we've done in the Smith School's behavioral lab primarily. We also have an e-lab that we use to reach people outside of our undergraduate student population. And we do some studies online as well to reach a wider circle of people. We looked first at some of the predictions that would be made by previous literature about the way consumers feel when they see partition prices. Right? So some earlier work suggests that people should always focus on the most important component. So if you're buying a computer and a surge protector, you're going to focus on the computer rather than the surge protector, which is a minor add-on. If you're buying a bed and a nightstand, you're going to focus on the price of the bed. Nightstand is a little add-on. That work would predict that it's always the most important component, the more expensive component that you focus on, and you want to get discounts on that component. But there's also work in psychology and in pricing that suggests that consumers focus on the smaller component. Right? So there's something called Weber's Law, which is really a theory about the way people perceive information. And when you look at product packages, for example, if you have a larger package, you can make a larger unit size change before people will notice that it's smaller. Some of the food companies, to save costs, are making their packages smaller. And when they do so, it's more noticeable when that package starts out small than when it starts out large, right? Because the proportional shift is larger when it's small, right? So if I'm going to change the price of labor in this example from $32.50 to $52.50, right? That's a larger percentage change than if I'm going to decrease the price of the bumper from $89.95 to $69.95, right? So it's $20 in both cases, but if you compare it to the initial price, right, it's a bigger percentage change for the small component than for the large component. So the first set of literature says focus on the most important component. So I should prefer auto service shop B relative to A because that most important component is getting the discount. Right? The second set of literature suggests I should prefer A to B because your discount is on the smaller component. Right? We argue that it's not this perceptual process at all. Right? So neither of these are what we would predict.
This is different because there's two entities here, but take in the state of Maryland gasoline. Gas prices have gone up. The state wants to tack on tax. I forget if they've abandoned that plan, but there's more uproar over the tax than the fact that gas prices doubled.
Yeah. I see that so clearly. So I live just a couple blocks from D.C. in Maryland, and my husband works in Virginia. Right? So we see gas prices in all these different localities, and the taxes are a big proportion of it. And you see the difference in prices when you cross over into D.C., when you cross over into Virginia, and yes, these taxes are viewed as nuisances and what we would call low benefit components, right? So people hate paying taxes. I mean, gas, you've got to buy gas. Gas is useful, right? So it's more of a high benefit component.
They don't look at the fact that you gotta fix roads, you gotta, which is what the tax
That's somebody else's stuff, right? That's somebody else's worry.
But there's something else going on there too. I don't think anybody thinks that they have any control whatsoever on prices.
Right.
They do have a say in whether or not taxes are
Sure.
So if there's a public outcry, and it seems to have worked in the Maryland General Assembly this session.
Right.
So.
And another thing we can do with partitions is assign blame to a third party. So that's the reason that we see these airlines and we see these gas stations allocating out the taxes. It's because it's clear that that's not our fault. Right? The airport's adding this fee. The taxing, the locality is adding this fee, and thus it's not our problem. It's not our blame. Right?
It's bad enough that in Montgomery County with a 5-cent bag tax, we'll refuse to pay 10 cents. We'll make 2 trips back to the car just to.
Back to the baggage fees. Haven't the airlines turned around and done anything to say, hey, we charge this baggage fee, but we also have the least amount of lost claims in the industry? Have they done anything like that to justify?
Yeah. Our work that I'll talk about at the end, this idea of these downstream benefits, right, would suggest that consumers are going to hold them to that, right? So if I pay this bag fee, I'll be more upset if you lose my bag and it's late coming out, and I will expect you to be more responsive on that particular service characteristic than anything else, right? If my food is crushed or late coming to me, right, that's not going to be so much of an issue because I'm not paying extra for that. It's this bag fee that I'm going to focus on because this partitioning makes it very salient in the consumer's mind, right? So that's what we argue is that that partitioning is a big cue to consumers. What do you focus on? Where do you put your attention in the process? So what we argue here is not that people will focus on the larger component or the smaller component, but that they really care about a particular component because they hate paying for labor. So if you're getting your car fixed, they're charging me so much for labor. I don't mind paying for that part. That's going to be on my car. That's going to increase the value of my car. But labor, makes people's blood boil. And so what we find in our studies is that people prefer not the particular discounts, but even when we flip the relative size of the components, that people focus and choose the division of prices that makes labor smaller. Right? They want to pay less for labor. That's a low benefit component. We go through a lot of testing to figure out that's perceived as providing less benefit, and that what we say in statistical terms mediates this effect, right? So it explains why people feel so negatively about paying for the labor charges.
Has there been any studies on whether or not expertise affects the labor price? Because going to your corner gas station and taking it to the dealer, you expect that there's higher expertise.
Yes. Yes.
And, that works in legal services also.
Sure.
The same kind of effect.
Yeah.
You're kind of looking for
we
make
do.
sure it's done right.
Yeah, so here, this study, we talk about the benefit being greater in some cases than in others. So we, in our studies, manipulate how, the craftsmanship is perceived, right? So if you can convince someone that they're buying something, and we told people in this case that, they were buying a gift. This was a wooden keyboard stand they were buying for a friend, and this friend really cares about good craftsmanship. They're willing to pay more for labor. So it's not that people are never willing to pay for labor. It's that they, feel in some cases it provides more benefit than in other cases.
I just want to give you an example of that. I work for a company called Avaya. We do telecommunications, and we're a vendor, so we make the equipment, and we also provide installation and maintenance. And when we do our pricing, we always make sure to price higher than our channels that also will do our installations, because we want the perceived value that you're getting something that's something that a partner couldn't provide. They don't make it. We know it better than they do. So we want them to look at the price and say, oh yeah, well, it should be priced higher because you should be a lot better at it than the channel.
And your marketing should all support that too, right? So your, descriptions of what people are getting should incorporate that. Any other communications that the buyers will get should support that higher price. And that's something that we find too, is that, when you emphasize the benefit, right, you can increase the perceived benefit in consumers' minds. And, that's an important piece of it, that they really perceive that higher benefit. Yeah. We did that in a, so this was the case for a service. We also tried it for a product, and we told people that either they infrequently experience power surges or they frequently experience power surges. When they frequently experience power surges, the surge protector something they're willing to pay more for, they're perceiving more benefit in it because it helps them, right? And they become less price sensitive to this component, right? One other interesting study that really speaks to this marketing that firms can do is when we ran, one of the concerns you might have with some of our earlier studies, labor and parts for cars or these keyboard stands, is that consumers are unfamiliar with those kinds of prices. So we said, well, let's run a study where consumers have pretty good reference prices in mind. We ran this study with student subjects. What do they buy? They buy pizza, they buy buffalo wings, and so we used bundles of offers here where we said buy a large one-item pizza for $7.99 and get 20 wings for $3.99, which is half price, or the mirror offer, same total price, you're buying 20 wings for $7.99 and you're getting this large one-item pizza for $3.99. And earlier work had shown that people focus on this larger component. They tend to focus on the pizza, and this earlier work said, oh, people always want the discount to be on the pizza. And we said, well, I think we can manipulate that. We told people before they were given this offer, either you've been having a strong craving for pizza all day, and you finally decided to get your pizza, or you've been really looking forward to having some hot wings, and here's a deal that you might want to consider. And people showed these preferences, so that if you look at this vertical axis here, lower numbers mean people prefer offer A, which is the full-price pizza, and higher numbers mean people prefer paying full price for the wings. When people were told they had this craving for pizza, right, they prefer offer A. When people are told they're looking forward to these wings, they prefer offer B, right? They want to pay full price for the wings, right? In the control condition, we didn't tell them anything about their cravings. We let them come into the study as they were, right? And we found a replication of the previous results, which is, that people tend to consider the discount on wings more attractive because they're focusing on the pizza. They're focusing on this more important component, right? So what we concluded from this series of studies is that consumers prefer to pay less for components they feel don't offer them the large benefits, right? So those are things like shipping and labor, right? And the wings, if they don't think about wings as the primary part of the deal. And so when sellers and firms are thinking about allocating the total price, they should consider how much benefit do consumers think they're getting from each of these components. And they can also manipulate this, right? So if they say in their marketing, oh, aren't you hungry for pizza? Well, they've got to expect that they're creating a goal for pizza among their consumers. Or when you're marketing to your customers, you say, oh, we provide the highest level of service. You can't get this level of service from anyone else, right? Then that's going to increase people's willingness to pay for that particular service, right? And they're going to be less price sensitive as a result, and you can allocate more of your profits to that component because they're going to be less price sensitive. Okay. So getting into some of our newer research, right? This is what we are currently working on. We're just finished running some more studies yesterday. We'll run some more on Amazon and Shark coming up over the next week. So we call this project When Dividing Prices Multiplies Customer Expectations, because when you're partitioning a component, you're focusing the customer's attention on that component, and they might expect more, right? And so that's what we're going to propose here. When we were developing this research, I looked online, and I was looking at, what are the things that hotels provide, and what do they charge extra for, and what do they bundle into the price? And I looked at two very comparable hotel rooms in the sort of midtown Manhattan on the west side, right below the park. You've got both the Marriott Marquis there, and you've also got the Sheraton New York Hotel and Towers. If you look at the prices, obviously they know their competitors because they're very similarly priced. They're fighting for the same target customers. The Marriott Marquis had a connectivity package that included a standard room and high-speed internet, right, $316. For almost exactly the same price, you could get the same deal at the Sheraton New York Hotel and Towers, except that it was divided into the price of the room at $299 and $14.95 for high-speed internet service. Right? So the question, probably answered this in our discussion so far, but our key research question here is, if you charge separately, or if you don't, does that affect consumers' reactions when something that you may not always have control over happens, right? The internet service is slow. What's going to create a more dissatisfied customer? Right? We argue that partitioning that price and charging $14.99 for that internet service is going to create more of a focus on that component, and consumers' expectations will be this high instead of this high, and they'll be more likely to be dissatisfied when they check out if they have slow service.
Which one of those is the consumer more likely to? You're talking about from the owner's perspective, right? Keeping the customer happy.
Well, I'm talking about from the customer's perspective. Who's going to be more dissatisfied?
Well, I guess when you bundle and don't bundle, which one is the consumer more likely to click on, right? When they're searching on the internet.
Well, I mean, I think it depends, right? So if you're, suppose you're a business customer, and your firm's going to be paying for your stay, but your firm doesn't like you to charge them back for internet service, right? You might be pretty attracted to this package here, because that allows you to get your high-speed internet all for one low fee that your firm is going to pay for. Whereas here, you might be charged back from your company to, and you can't charge this $14.95 on your expense report, right? So consumers, may or may not have preferences, and that's not the question we're asking here, which one they're going to be attracted to. We're saying, given a particular choice on the part of the firm, where the total price doesn't vary, what's going to make a guest more upset if there's a service failure? Yeah. So, as we said before, partitioning can make the total price seem lower, right, because they're paying $2.99 for the room instead of $3.16, but it makes the price of that component more salient. And so, why do we think that this may affect downstream satisfaction? Well, as you all know, as customers, expectations are everything, right? So when there's a large literature on customer satisfaction that points to this effect. So just, intuitively, if you think about a movie, right? So a while ago, my friend was telling me, oh, you have to see this movie, The Artist, it's the best ever, it's so creative and different, and, my expectations were built way, way up, right? Could the film possibly satisfy those high expectations, right? If I had just gone to see it and not heard very much about it, probably would have been a lot more excited about it and would have, been more likely to spread positive word of mouth afterwards, right? It wasn't the film itself that was bad, it was just that my expectations were so high. And so we call this expectancy disconfirmation, right? So you've got either high expectations or you've got low expectations. And this would be, performance. And then maybe your actual experience here. We call, if your expectations are here and you actually have this experience, this is what we call a negative expectancy disconfirmation, right? Because your expectations were higher than your actual experience. This is what we call a positive expectancy disconfirmation, because your expectations were low and the performance of the product exceeded your expectations, right? And this is very important because when we have a negative expectancy disconfirmation, when the performance is lower than our expectations, we're dissatisfied. And not only are we dissatisfied with that particular component, it bleeds through to the entire experience. And so if we have high expectations for internet service and those expectations aren't met, then we may never want to stay at the Sheraton New York Hotel and Towers again. Right? It may create dissatisfaction with the entire experience, even components that weren't directly associated with this internet service. So those expectations are a strong reference point against which you evaluate your experience, and this can really color the whole experience. That's why we expect this to have such a strong effect.
So the lesson to be learned is partition out those pieces that nothing can go wrong.
Yes, yes, and counter to this, right, it's often the new things that are partitioned out, right? So when internet service wasn't a standard part, when hotels were just putting in hotel internet service, they were trying to pay back their fixed costs and they were charging for it, right? That's when the internet service was the shakiest, right? Now that all the kinks are ironed out, well, now they start including it, right? Really the wrong approach. So, we want to see things bundled when there's more of a chance for service failure. And this is sort of cutting to the conclusion, but yes, that's exactly right. When there's a chance or when there's more variability in the service we can deliver, right, then we don't want to partition these out. Right? So we did a study where we either partitioned or didn't partition out parking. We told people they were going to an interview in Philadelphia, they were going to drive, they needed a place to park their car overnight, so this was sort of a mandatory thing that the hotel had to have parking. And we said, this is the hotel you decided to go to, and we asked them about their expectations for various components, right? So we didn't limit it to parking, but we said, well, how are your expectations for parking? How are your expectations for the housekeeping service? How are your expectations for the wireless internet? So we measured those expectations, and we found that when prices were partitioned, so that parking was a separate component, expectations for parking were higher than when they were not partitioned, right? So it didn't affect significantly either the internet or the housekeeping. Our pricing structure didn't affect those, but parking was the focal component that was partitioned out, and we see higher expectations here, significantly. So, we read another study where we had people imagine they were going to be flying to San Francisco, and we said there's this new service just introduced called live TV, and with this service you can get live streaming content as you go, and we either partitioned that out of the total price or we did not. And then we said, okay, well, what happens if this new service fails? How are consumers going to react? We found that, as in our first study, when we partitioned out the price of that live TV, people's expectations were higher, right? They were focusing in on the component. And then we also measured what we call their expectancy disconfirmation, right? So what was the difference between their expectations and the actual performance of that component? And you see here when there was no failure, right, expectations were pretty much on par with the delivery, right? So there's no real difference here. When there was a failure, it really mattered whether those expectations were higher as a result of partitioning or not. So when my expectations were higher and the price was partitioned, I have a really strong expectancy disconfirmation, less pronounced when the prices were combined. Right? And that affects overall satisfaction. So we said not how satisfied were you with the live TV service, we said how satisfied were you overall with your flight given that this service either failed or didn't fail, right? And these were between subjects comparisons. We found that there was a significant difference in people's overall satisfaction, such that when the price was not partitioned and there was a failure, right, they were almost as satisfied as they were without a failure, right? And this is a mild failure. We said there was a blip so that for 15 minutes they couldn't watch, right, and then they reset it, and then it was okay, right? If we had said there was this horrible failure, it never worked the entire time they were on the airline, right, probably their overall satisfaction would be much lower. But this satisfaction was what we call a mild failure. We ran another study, and this study is quite interesting because we not only had a failure condition, where we had these components fail, we also had other conditions where people just decided not to use them. Right? So how bad can that be? We said to people that they were going to a local NFL football game, and I have to apologize because we were in the DC area, we used the Redskins, not the Ravens. We told people they were going to this NFL game, and that the only tickets left were ones that included parking and valet parking, and that the game ticket was $55, the parking was $20, making a total of $75, or they were just told that the overall price of this ticket that included parking was $75. We measured their expectations, and then we said to some people, well, the day of the game, you and your friend decided you were going to just take the metro to the stadium and, not deal with the hassle of driving. and that was the no-use condition. So they didn't use parking, although they had either paid for it explicitly or it had been bundled into their charge. Or we had a mild failure condition where they learned that they had to wait a few minutes before the valet was available to come to them, and then they parked the car successfully. Or it was better than they expected, where the valet came to them immediately, greeted them warmly, escorted them to their seat, and gave them a few free beverage coupons, right, that they didn't expect. Right, so that was better than expected. Or we just said you parked successfully, had no problems, and went to your seat and enjoyed the game. So there were these 4 different conditions, and we thought, well, maybe if there's such a negative effect of partitioning out the price when there's a failure, if we have this delight condition where we give them something better than they ever expected, we'll get a bump because people are thinking about this parking more, and it'll be more salient to them that they had a great experience, right? So that would be this positive expectancy disconfirmation that we're talking about, compared to negative expectancy disconfirmation. Do you think we're going to see that? We thought so too. We thought so, yeah. Okay, so this slide's about the expectations. So again, we replicate our earlier effect. They didn't think price was really any different when it was partitioned or not partitioned. The seating, expectations were about the same. It was when we talked about parking that expectations were higher when the price was partitioned than when it was not. And then when we looked at overall satisfaction, right, we saw that when parking was as expected, right, we see this, it's fine, right? There's no difference between partitioning and non-partitioning. The worse than expected conditions, what we looked at in the earlier studies, right? People were more dissatisfied when the price was partitioned than when it wasn't, right? The same thing was true in the no-use condition, right? Even though they decided, we told them of their own accord voluntarily to go on the metro to the stadium rather than driving, there was this sunk cost effect. They felt like they had paid for parking and they didn't use it. So it made them more dissatisfied than if the price had been bundled in to the total price of the game, right? And that was kind of a neat effect here because, there's been other evidence that these sunk costs really affect people's satisfaction, but this was something that we could generalize to this context. Yeah.
Is that scale on the left 0 to 10?
It's a 1 to 7 scale.
It is a 1
Yeah.
to 7.
I truncated the bottom because it wasn't as interesting, but yeah, it's a
So
satisfaction.
a person created satisfaction would be a 7.
Yes. So people in this delight condition, when we said, oh, you got these 2 free beverage coupons, the valet greeted you warmly, they were satisfied as could be, right? In both conditions, right? And there wasn't really any difference whether it's partitioned or not partitioned. It could be sort of a ceiling effect here where you can't go any higher than 7. But we didn't really find this, benefit of partitioning when we exceeded expectations.
Wondering why 7 and not 5 or 10.
Oh, yeah, and standard scales, yeah, good question. But standard scales, if you have a Likert scale or a semantic differential scale would be 1 to 7.
You all probably know that.
No.
MBAs.
Yeah, but when, you sometimes see 1 to 9, 1 to 7, and it's sort of a norm, right? There's no real reason, and then we treat them as semi-continuous measures in our analysis, which is kind of an interesting assumption. But yes, these are 1 to 7 scales, and so we don't find the benefit of delighting our customers like we do the shortfall of filling. So, yes.
So when you see difference between the partition and the non-partition, what do you call a significant difference?
Yes.
The
So
use is about it's like 3 and some, 4 and some. Do you consider that?
yes. So this is based on statistics. So we do what we call an F-test. So this is testing whether there's a difference in the means here. And so this F-test here is across all 4 conditions, and it says, is there a difference among these based on partitioning and this condition? And we find this is what we call an interaction effect, so that when we look at these different conditions, partitioning affects them differently. Right? So that's what that measure says. And then we can go in, and if we want to do a follow-up contrast between these means, we could use a t-test or an f-test specific to this condition. and what we found is that this difference was significant. P less than 0.05, which means that 95% of the time if we ran this experiment 100 times, 95 of those times we'd find that those were very distinct means. Same with this difference here. It's going to be distinct and different, clearly different, 95 out of 100 times, right? Or in this case, 96 out of 100 times because of P less than 0.04. So when I say different, these, you see little differences, but that's what we call a non-significant difference. So, the p-value is more than like 0.10 or 0.15 or somewhere that we don't consider statistically significant. Yeah. So that's how we make that conclusion that these different conditions in the experiment make people feel differently and make them react differently. Yes.
Interesting sort of peripherals, because you're thinking of what happened at Bank of America. Not only, it was just the wrong political environment to do what they did, but not only did it cause them backlash, there was a whole movement to pull money out of big banks and put them in, credit unions and in small local banks. But I guess the question is, where does your research go from here with regard to the relative strength of, not expectations of a particular product, but the relative strength of a brand and how that affects expectations? And is there a distinction between some of these consumer vendors that have loyalty programs? So how is the United Airlines frequent flyer affected differently from the normal guy that just wants to go on a vacation, only flies once a year, versus the hotel frequent, I'm a Marriott Awards person.
Yes.
How does that work?
Very good question. I think this is primarily a question about the strength of the brand in terms of the consumer, in the consumer's mind, right? And so what we know from other research is that when consumers have a strong relationship with a brand, that brand has more leeway to do things that the customer might find very aversive with a brand that's less strong. So yes, I think that the Bank of America customers, Bank of America is probably at an all-time low in terms of brand evaluations. They're quick to jump on. And similarly, I guess the reverse is that the brand loyalists to Marriott or to Sheraton would be less likely to penalize the hotel for any problem, including.
But did you measure that, or is that another study you want to do?
No. In these studies, we didn't use brands, but I think that's a really interesting idea. That's interesting because brands do have an insulating effect on any actions by the firm.
On the counter of this, packaging can be beneficial both for the consumer and the business, because the consumer feels like they're getting more value, less hassle in the decision-making process.
Yeah.
And the business can actually, through the hidden aspect of packaging, create a better profit margin.
Sure. Yeah, this idea of bundling, and you just have to go through the hurdle if that total price looks higher, right? What we found is that partitioning increases expectations. Mild failures then have a more negative effect. Non-use has a more negative effect, and we don't see this asymmetry, so that the positive disconfirmation has an equally beneficial effect. When you have a chance, if you're interested in this sort of decision process and this decision tree, the article that y'all got, the Nickel and Dime Customers article, goes through a step-by-step process where you're kind of answering questions about how to price your products, right? So we first ask, does the consumer comparison shop, right? Is the customer yours? Is the customer already brand loyal and they're not going to be evaluating you against your competitor? Or is the customer going to be looking at your competitors? If they're not going to be looking at competitors, well then it's really up to you. How do you want the customer to feel about your prices? And does the component satisfy consumers' goals, like pizza or the labor charges? Do people feel like those are benefits? If they are benefits, then by all means, partition them out, make them salient. If they don't, combine those prices. If the competitors partition prices, right, then if consumers are considering competitors, then you want to think about various aspects. And again, thinking about consumers' reactions, whether they're negative or positive to those partition components. And we go through maybe 15 steps how to make the decision in a way that is supported by this customer. search. So hopefully you find it helpful. Email me. I'd love to talk to you about your issues.
I just had one quick question. I imagine that language would be salient
Yes.
here. If you say that this is free,
Yes.
you have a hotel with free internet, they wouldn't care so much if there was a failure there versus it's included, where they feel like they are paying
Yes.
for it. Did that figure into the research in any way?
We have experimented with that because that's a very interesting way to make something salient and yet make consumers feel like the value is very high relative to the price. And so it does make a difference. And when you say something's free, we found that with shipping, people loved it. With labor, they were a little more suspicious of it, right? So think about getting your car fixed and labor is free. Well, labor isn't. So there was sort of a backlash effect with labor when we got into free rather than included, which we found very interesting. So that's what we say in this decision framework is the norms, right? So there's a norm that you get shipping free, but the norm about labor, I mean, if everybody started doing it, well, sure, that would seem fine. But if people are taken aback by it, it's not something they've seen before, right? I mean, sometimes you see free installation of carpet, right? Or that's okay, but free installation of a car part, it's a little bit trickier. So I know I'm supposed to end. But I'm more than happy to keep taking questions or do Q&A.
What is your email?
R. Hamilton, R-H-A-M-I-L-T-O. When I joined Maryland in 2000, they were restricted to 8 letters, so chops off the N on the end of my name. But R-H-A-M-I-L-T-O at rhsmith.umd.edu.
Thank you.
Great. So when you ask me your business questions, it helps me do the next generation's research. So that's great. Thank you very much.